All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Pioch. I'm here for the New York City Bar Association's Day of the Endangered Lawyer program. I'm joined by Dr. Ardeshir Arjomand and Professor Javaid Rehman, who are going to be our speakers today. I just want to thank everybody for coming, for attending. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors at the City Bar. We have the Middle Eastern and North African Affairs Committee, as well as the International Human Rights Committee. And I'd also like to thank our co-sponsoring organization, the Iranian American Bar. I chair the City Bar's Task Force on the Independence of Lawyers and Judges. We focus on international lawyers' rights issues. Our goal is to bring knowledge and awareness to issues surrounding harassment, intimidation, and threats to lawyers and judges by their own governments. And today we're celebrating, or rather I should say, we're observing the Day of the Endangered Lawyer, which is an annual day that has been put on every year since 2009, and it highlights a country of focus each year. This year's country of focus is going to be Iran. So for our speakers today, I'm going to first introduce Dr. Javaid Rehman, who is the third and current special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran since the reestablishment of the UN mandate by the Human Rights Council. He was appointed on July 6th of 2018 and began serving in his role on July 13th of that year. Dr. Rehman is a professor of international human rights law and Muslim constitutionalism at Brunel University in London. Dr. Rehman teaches human rights law and Islamic law and continues to publish extensively on international human rights issues. As a human rights lawyer, Dr. Rehman has also provided legal opinions in different high-profile cases in several jurisdictions. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Rehman. We'll let you speak first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this generous invitation for me to speak to you and to our audience on the Day of the Endangered Lawyer. And as you mentioned, we are focusing on the situation of lawyers in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I begin my presentation with some opening observations to say that an independent and effective judicial and legal system presents an essential prerequisite for ensuring democratic governance, constitutionalism, respect for rule of law and human rights. Such a system is built on the platform of an independent functioning judiciary, which has the capacity to ensure human rights and the rule of law, as well as lawyers that are capable to effectively represent and defend all those whose rights have been violated or are at the risk of violation. In the case of Islamic Republic of Iran, unfortunately, the judicial and legal system has been suppressed through the negation of the principles of separation of powers and rule of law, a total domination of and subjugation of the judiciary, and the continuing state efforts to undermine the work of lawyers and members of the legal profession. While I shall return to the role of the judiciary and the negative impact of human rights protection within the Iranian legal system, there is no doubt that lawyers within Iran have been consistently targeted, intimidated, and harassed, their personal safety violated and breached, placing them at serious physical and psychological risk, including in many cases through arbitrary arrests, solitary confinements, torture or ill treatment, and lengthy imprisonments. There are also substantial hurdles placed on their independence and professionalism, with threats to debar them so as to deprive them of their ability to challenge an oppressive and unjust system of laws and procedures. On the International Day of the Endangered Lawyer, I would like to applaud and appreciate all those courageous Iranian lawyers who, notwithstanding substantial personal threats and persecution, have worked tirelessly with utmost commitment, dedication, and professionalism to preserve and protect human rights within Iran. As I reported to the United Nations General Assembly and to the Human Rights Council last year, during the women life freedom movement, worst atrocities were committed against the brave Iranian people, which included state killings of hundreds of peaceful protesters, torture, severe bodily injuries, extreme repression, and forced disappearances, persecution, rape, violence, including sexual and gender violence, mass and arbitrary arrests. Tragically, as you would have heard, a ninth person associated to the protests was executed just this morning. These crimes that I've mentioned were state-instituted, systematic, and were of such a grave nature that I took the view that state had committed the most serious crimes in international law, including possibly crimes against humanity. Notwithstanding repeated calls for the UN mechanisms, including by my own mandate for independent, impartial, and transparent investigations into the death in police custody of Gina Mahsa Amini, as well as the killings of hundreds of protesters, their torture and brutality shown by state officials. Regrettably, no independent, transparent, and impartial investigations have taken place. No state official has been held accountable or any action taken against them, nor have there been any independent, impartial, and transparent investigations that have taken place into the school poisonings reported of thousands of schoolgirls during 2020 and 2023. Worse still, those seeking justice for the victims of human rights violations, most prominently lawyers of victims, are themselves harassed, targeted, threatened, and in many cases put in prison. In my report presented to the UN General Assembly in October of last year, I noted in my report of continuing arrests and detentions of human rights lawyers in relation to their work. From September 16, 2022 to 10th of January 2023, I received reports that at least 44 lawyers were arrested for their work. 27 of those have reportedly been released, while the rest remain in detention. I would like to mention that intimidation, persecution, arrests, detention, sentencing, and convictions of lawyers represents a continuous and vicious pattern in which lawyers have been subjected to prolonged pretrial detentions, unfair trials based on vaguely worded or overly broad laws, lengthy prison sentences and ill treatment, denial of medical care, and prolonged solitary confinement merely for carrying out their duties as members of the legal profession or for their legitimate human rights advocacy. I've been extremely concerned at these arrests and detentions, which reinforce a pattern of consistent interference with the legal profession, contrary to human rights laws and standards. Therefore, special procedures, including my own mandate, raised our concerns in January of last year, 2023, as regards 7 lawyers who were arrested and harassed for working on human rights cases, establishing a pattern of state interference and violating fundamental human rights standards. The lawyers arrested included Mustafa Nili and Arash Kekhswari, who had previously been convicted on national security charges and imprisoned for their attempt to file a lawsuit against senior official figures, including the Iranian Supreme Leader, for their initial ban of the import of COVID-19 vaccines, with devastating consequences in terms of loss of human life in Iran. Furthermore, in contravention of the Bar Association's independence law, Mr. Neely and Mr. Kekhosrawari were banned by the court from practicing law for 2 years and 1 year respectively. Within the Iranian operative mechanisms, swift and brutal repression is dispensed on all those who seek to defend human rights, as well as upon those who want justice and accountability for gross violations of human rights. This includes victims of human rights abuses, their families, human rights defenders and lawyers. Human rights defender and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Nargis Mohammadi remains incarcerated in prison, denied access to medical care despite substantial health issues, including serious heart and lung conditions. She is being punished for her human rights activism, for her campaigns for the abolition of the death penalty, for her support of the human rights defenders and protesters, including those protesting in November 2019 protests, for exposing sexual violence in prisons, and indeed for her inspirational work for the women life freedom movement that began with the state killing of Jina Mahsa Amini on 16th of September 2022. On 15th of January 2024, she is reported to have been sentenced to an additional 15 months in prison. The prominent human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh, while on medical furlough from her harsh prison sentence of lengthy imprisonment and lashes delivered in 2019, was reported to have been severely beaten on 29th of October 2023 on her head and face as she joined mourners attending the funeral of the 16-year-old Armita Girevand. Sotoudeh was sent to Karshak prison, where she started a hunger strike and is reported to have been refusing to take her medications. It is reported that she was released on bail on 15th of November 2023. The lawyer of the family of Jina Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old woman, whose death in police custody sparked the women life freedom movement. The lawyer, Saleh Nikbacht, was handed a 1-year prison sentence by the Iranian courts for engaging in propaganda against the Iranian regime. Mr. Nikbacht had asked for an independent, impartial investigation into the death in police custody of Jina Mahsa Amini and had challenged the state narrative that she had died because of heart attack and underlying disease. In addition to direct assaults, unjust sentences, and intimidation, the ability of lawyers to practice professionally and independently of state control has also been eroded through a variety of manner, including through threats of debarment or other means of encroachment and undermining of their independence. Intimidation and harassment have been reported since April 2023, when nearly 100 lawyers were summoned to Avon Security Court, reportedly asked to sign a document expressing their personal remorse for their support to the protests. Failure to sign this document was meant to result in their debarment from working as lawyers. There have been numerous attempts by the Iranian state to weaken the foundations of the legal profession in the country, including through creating and promoting a parallel body of lawyers who are under the direct supervision of the judiciary. More explicit governmental control of the bar associations is also imposed by the state, including through the regulation of the enforcement of the law on the independence of the bar association, which has increasingly allowed the judiciary to interfere with the internal affairs of the bar association, including the election of their directors and the granting and revocation of licenses to practice law. In June 2023, Iran's parliament approved a request to investigate the operations of the Bar Association and their union. The resulting investigation appears to be aimed at extending the government's ability to increase pressure and interfere directly in the affairs of the Bar Association. The so-called security investigations and an explicit requirement to monitor lawyers to ensure that they demonstrate commitment to Islamic law and the supreme leader is another effort to block individuals from minority groups or those not conforming to the state-imposed ideology and might have the ability and willingness to challenge the authoritarian system led by the supreme leader. The system of the protection of human rights and the ongoing repression of lawyers needs to be considered within the overall context in which the legal and constitutional system operates. Within this legal framework, Iranian judiciary remains subservient to the executive led by the supreme leader and acting upon the whims of an unaccountable supreme leader. The judiciary has become fully politicized, biased, and hostile towards constitutional practices, including preserving and protecting human rights. Constitutional provisions, including Article 61 of the Constitution, limits the powers of the judiciary, which must be considered and which must be conducted in accordance with the overarching yet undefined Islamic criteria. The principles of judicial independence and separation of powers are further impaired by provisions related to the appointment of the head of the judiciary and the judges. The head of the judiciary is directly appointed for a period of 5 years by the supreme leader. The head of the Supreme Court and all judges are directly or indirectly selected by the head of the judiciary. The criteria for becoming a judge are additionally politicized by requirements such as having faith and practical commitment to Islam, practical commitment to the constitution and principle of Velayat-e-Faqih, and lack of any affiliation or sympathy with illegal groups, parties, and organizations. Women, as some of you may be aware, are ineligible to be appointed as adjudicating judges in Iran, or they are ineligible to be appointed as the head of the judiciary. The vetting processes attached to the appointment of judges ensure that the political and religious beliefs of judges are fully aligned to that of the state ideology. Judges who challenge the official state ideology risk being subjected to punishments, including being dismissed and permanently barred from holding judicial positions based on vague and arbitrary criteria. Thus, in this system, the judiciary, instead of acting as a vanguard of fundamental rights and as an independent body towards which individuals can seek recourse, acts as a repressive state organ, depriving of and violating fundamental human rights. It is this system which has continued to threaten the independence and effectiveness of lawyers and has targeted and victimized many of the lawyers who have challenged this oppressive system. Throughout my mandate, I have been concerned at the role of revolutionary courts in the Iranian criminal justice system. Since their establishment in 1979, after the orders made by the Supreme Leader in 1979, these courts have conducted summary and arbitrary trials to exterminate political opponents of the revolution. Despite a lack of constitutional basis, revolutionary courts have continued to operate and sentence political activists, journalists, lawyers, and human rights defenders behind closed doors, with convictions in such cases influenced by intelligence bodies. Since their inception, these courts have consistently violated fundamental human rights, including through failure of the right to a fair trial and failure of due process rights, as these are contained in Article 14 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Iran is a state party. The revolutionary courts are responsible for issuing the vast majority of death penalty sentences, including thousands of summary and arbitrary executions. In the period between 2010 and 2020, the available statistics indicate that of the 606,033 executions, 60%, almost 60%, that is 3,619, were based on sentences issued by the revolutionary courts. The revolutionary courts and other criminal courts work within an environment which erodes or limits the ability of lawyers to work effectively and professionally for the defense of human rights. Amongst the many examples are the note to Article 48 of the Code of Criminal Procedure that denies the ability of defendants charged with national security crimes punishable by death or other harsh sentences to appoint a lawyer of their own choosing. Only lawyers on court-appointed lists are eligible to defend such individuals. Article 191 of the Code of Criminal Procedure allows investigators to prohibit lawyers from accessing the contents of their clients' files for broadly framed security reasons. More specifically, revolutionary courts regularly deprive the defendants of their right to have access to their lawyers or refuse to allow the lawyers to present adequate defense relying heavily on torture-induced confessions and convict individuals based on low evidentiary threshold and in violation of due process and in violation of the right to fair trial as provided by Article 14, which I say is part of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Iran is a state party. With these observations, I would end here, and I very much look forward to receiving some questions and responding to those questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Rehman. So we'll save some questions for the end. I'm going to introduce now Dr. Ardeshir Arjomand, who comes to us. We actually have a little bit of a team here, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Arjomand. He is going to be delivering a presentation in French. Now, unfortunately, we have had some Zoom technical difficulties today, so the presentation is going to go a little bit slower. We're going to ask if you can try to get the caption function to work. There should be a translatable caption there. If that does not work, which we don't expect it to based on the tech issues, Nina Turchek is going to be translating manually. So we ask your indulgence as we go through. This is going to be a little bit of a process, but we are very excited to hear from Dr. Arjomand. So without that, or without further ado there, please allow me to introduce Dr. Ardeshir Amir Arjomand, who received his PhD in international law from the University of Strasbourg in France in 1978. He was a licensed attorney in Tehran, Iran, and he has been an executive board member of the European Public Law Organization, the EPLO, since 2001. In addition, Dr. Arjomand has held extensive professorial positions in public law, international law, and human rights in Iran. He's been a UNESCO chairholder of human rights, democracy, and peace. In the infamous presidential election campaign of 2009, Dr. Arjomand worked as the top advisor to the presidential candidate, Mr. Mir Hossein Mousavi. And after the election, he was briefly detained by the government's authorities. So we're going to go slow. Thank you for your indulgence, Dr. Arjomand, and thank you for translation, Nina. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you two.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et les chers collègues. C'est un honneur, c'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous ce soir. La question qui se pose aujourd'hui est de savoir quels sont les défis auxquels sont confrontés les avocats aujourd'hui en Iran. Non seulement les avocats, mais également l'ordre professionnel des avocats. Pour comprendre la situation compliquée qui existe actuellement en Iran au sujet de la profession d'avocat, il suffit de voir deux informations qui ont été publiées hier dans les réseaux sociaux. Le premier concerne un avocat qui s'appelle Khosrow Ali-Kurdi. Il a été condamné à 1 an de prison. Son permis a été suspendu pour plusieurs années. Il a été également condamné au fouet. Pourquoi? Puisqu'il a assisté les victimes des affaires qui sont plutôt politiques. Et d'autre part, on voit que l'ancien procureur général de Téhéran, en 2010, qui était l'un des personnalités iraniennes qui a contribué à la répression du mouvement vert et des protestants iraniens, aujourd'hui, il obtient son permis d'avocat.
Apologies. I think Nina, if you could help us with the translation here, just to break it up into bite-sized chunks. I don't believe the translation is working.
Je dois parler plus doucement. Oui.
Nina? All right, one moment, please. Let's get the New York City Bar folks involved so we can see what's going on here. Cameron?
Je continue.
Un moment.
Nina is not, her microphone is muted. Now she just turned it on.
There we go. Nina, we've lost you again.
Bon. Je dois continuer ou bien je dois attendre?
Nina, I can hear you, but you switch your language to French, I believe. You need to change it to English. Nina, can you hear me? Okay. So you stay on English and, when you hear it from him, you just, start translating.
Cameron, perhaps very clearly the interpretation feature is broken on this Zoom. Perhaps if we make Nina just a panelist, that way she can translate and we're not going to waste people's time today.
Bon.
Just a second.
Ah,
There we go.
Okay,
je
perfect.
pense que ça va marcher, non?
Oui, je vais juste traduire ce que je vous avais dit juste maintenant. So thank you everyone for your patience. Just wanted to mention now that Mr. Arjomand is mentioned, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with you. He noted that one of the questions today is really the challenges that lawyers face in Iran, and not only lawyers, but everyone involved in the legal profession. So he went to note an example and as an information to show you how complex the situation is today in Iran. He mentioned an example of Hossa al-Koldi, who was actually suspended, whose license to practice law was suspended for several years, and he was also condemned to imprisonment because he assisted victims of certain political affairs. And now he will continue with other examples. Merci, Monsieur Arjomand, vous pouvez continuer.
Bon, je disais que d'autre part, c'était le procureur général de Téhéran en 2010 qui a obtenu son licence pour exercer la profession d'avocat hier. Alors, c'est une contradiction dans le système juridique iranien.
So the second case was of state attorney from Tehran, who obtained his license to practice law just yesterday. So in contradiction to, to the independence of the judicial system. Merci.
Quels sont les défis majeurs auxquels sont confrontés les avocats aujourd'hui en Iran? Sont plusieurs. D'abord, c'est les conditions d'accès à la profession. Deuxièmement, la sécurité professionnelle. Troisièmement, la liberté personnelle et même l'intégrité physique des avocats.
So what are the main risks today for lawyers in Iran? So first is already the access to this profession. Secondly is the security of actually engaging in this profession. And then also the personal security and the integrity of people in the legal profession.
J'essaie d'expliquer comment dans un système autoritaire qui est touché par la corruption structurelle et systémique, les avocats n'ont pas la possibilité d'exercer d'une manière indépendante et conforme aux règles de droit leur profession.
So because of this structural and systemic corruption in the country, lawyers cannot independently exercise their profession, nor they can exercise it in accordance with the law.
Après la révolution, en Iran, il y avait un arrêt d'un tribunal de la révolution qui expulsait un certain nombre d'avocats de l'ordre d'avocats central, ou bien barreau de Téhéran.
So after the revolution, there was a judgment of the revolutionary court, which actually prevented lawyers from engaging in law, in the practice of law.
Plus tard, il y avait un projet de loi qui était passé et dont le but était purger les administrations, également l'appareil judiciaire, des anciens agents, entre guillemets, de l'ancien régime, ou bien les gens qui n'étaient pas c'est-à-dire n'étaient pas conformes à l'idéologie du système.
After that, there was a draft of the law that was actually adopted and which aimed to actually prevent lawyers from participating in the profession if their views were not aligned with those of the state.
C'était la première tentative pour amorcer l'indépendance de l'ordre des avocats.
So this was to actually try the
La première
independence.
tentative pour limiter l'indépendance de l'ordre des avocats ou le barreau.
So an attempt to actually hinder or attack the independence of the Bar Association in general.
Plus tard, ils ont essayé de légitimiser l'exclusion d'une partie des gens de le droit de l'accès à la profession d'avocat.
They try to make legitimate their efforts to exclude a certain group of people from entering the profession.
Une loi qui a été passée en 1997 posait des conditions strictes pour accès à la profession d'avocat, comme la condition de base d'adhérer à la théorie de Velayat Faqih.
So in 1997, they imposed extreme conditions for those who wanted to obtain the license to practice.
Je ne vais pas entrer dans le détail de ces conditions, mais en résumé, tous les gens qui n'étaient pas d'accord avec la politique officielle auraient pu être exclus de la fonction d'avocat, de la profession d'avocat.
So I will not go into details into each of these conditions, but anyone whose views who did not agree with the official politics was actually excluded from the legal profession.
Mais pourquoi? C'est parce que les avocats auraient pu avoir un rôle important dans l'établissement et la consolidation de l'état de droit dans le pays, et plus la consolidation de la démocratie et la protection des droits de l'homme.
Why? Because lawyers are those who actually could play an important role in consolidating the democracy.
Un ordre d'avocats indépendants gênait le système politique.
Est-ce que vous pouvez juste répéter ça?
Un ordre d'avocats indépendants gênait le système politique.
There was a group of independent lawyers who had a political system in mind.
Parce que pour l'instauration de l'état de droit et la démocratie, la société civile est très importante et l'une des institutions non étatiques qui avait un grand précédent en Iran, enraciné en Iran, c'était l'ordre des avocats.
And the civil society is extremely important and has a voice. And one of the most important non-state actors was really this group of lawyers.
Quand ils ont vu que la loi pour purger l'ordre ne fonctionne pas comme ils souhaitaient, ils ont essayé de créer un ordre d'avocats parallèle.
So when they saw that this law was not working, they tried to actually create a group in parallel.
Alors, ils ont créé un ordre d'avocats qui dépendait du pouvoir judiciaire.
So they created a group of lawyers that depended on the judicial power and that defended the judicial power.
C'est-à-dire, par cette méthode, ils pouvaient neutraliser l'ordre d'avocats officiel ou bien qui était depuis longtemps instauré en Iran.
So with this method, they were able to neutralize this order that was after that implemented in Iran.
Aujourd'hui, ils pensent que ça ne suffit pas, c'est-à-dire ils ont fait des purges, mais ça ne suffit pas. Il faudrait prendre d'autres mesures.
But unfortunately now, this is not enough. We need to take other measures as well.
C'est pourquoi ils ont adopté un règlement par le président du pouvoir judiciaire qui ne respectait pas l'indépendance de l'ordre des avocats.
So for this reason, they adopted a rule by the president of the judiciary that did not respect the independence of the judiciary.
Puisque d'après la loi, l'ordre des avocats est une institution indépendante. Mais le président du pouvoir judiciaire n'avait pas légalement le droit d'adopter des règlements concernant cet ordre.
So because based on the law, the judiciary should be independent.
Encore, ils ont avancé et récemment, ils ont essayé de disparaître d'une manière l'ordre des avocats dans une loi concernant des réglementations qui étaient sur la question des métiers de commerce. Ils ont essayé de assimiler la profession d'avocat aux autres métiers de profession commerciale.
Mm-hmm.
Alors, ce qui était totalement contraire au fondement de la fonction de la profession d'avocat et de l'ordre des avocats.
So what they try to do is they try to abolish basically this independence of legal profession with the law, where they would assimilate legal profession to other professions, including commercial professions, which would be absolutely contrary to the profession of lawyers.
D'autre part, ils essaient de limiter l'accès au conseil de l'ordre ou bien le conseil exécutif de l'ordre des avocats en posant des questions, en posant des conditions très strictes.
So they're trying to limit access to the executive councils of the bar by also imposing again strict conditions.
Les gens qui se portent candidats pour devenir membres du Conseil de l'ordre, leur habilité doit être approuvée par le tribunal disciplinaire de pouvoir judiciaire, qui est totalement aberrant.
Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter, s'il vous plaît?
J'ai dit que les gens qui se portent candidats pour devenir membres du Conseil de l'ordre ou bien Conseil exécutif de l'ordre des avocats, leur habilité doit être approuvée par le tribunal disciplinaire de pouvoir judiciaire.
So the candidates for being members of the executive council of the bar first need to be approved by the tribunal, which is part of the judiciary.
Autrement dit, là, c'est pas, ce sont les appareils sécuritaires de sûreté qui interviennent, c'est-à-dire ils éliminent déjà les gens qui ne sont pas conformes à leur idée politique ou bien à leur tendance officielle.
So with this approach, they already eliminate people who are not in conformity with their political ideas.
Bon, ça, c'est une des défis. L'autre, c'est l'application des lois, c'est-à-dire les avocats dans la pratique n'ont pas la possibilité d'exercer leur travail dans une condition saine et conforme au principe qui est connu mondialement.
So the second challenge then would be the application of the laws. So lawyers currently do not have the possibility to work in a healthy environment.
Le droit à la justice procédurale est très important. C'est peut-être l'un des droits qui a été garanti d'une manière générale et sans condition par la Constitution iranienne.
So the procedural rights are extremely important. Probably one of the general rights that have been should have been implemented by the Constitution.
On sait bien que les droits procéduraux ne sont pas comme les autres libertés, par exemple, ne sont pas comme liberté d'expression. Il n'y a pas, c'est-à-dire, ils ne sont pas matériels, mais ils sont plutôt des garanties d'autres droits.
So this right is different, like for example, the right to free speech, because it's not a material right, but it's right that guarantees other rights.
Le troisième chapitre de la Constitution iranienne pose des questions ambiguës concernant les autres droits, par exemple le droit de l'expression, la torture, le droit de l'expression, liberté religieuse et tout ça. Mais pour le droit à l'accès à la justice et le droit de l'avocat, c'est général, c'est complet et sans aucune condition.
So the third chapter of the Iranian Constitution includes rights like right to expression and freedom of religion, and the access to justice also, which is general and without any conditions.
Encore, je ne veux pas entrer dans les détails, mais ce qui est très important, surtout dans les affaires politiques et dans les affaires nommées également par les autorités, les affaires sécuritaires ou de sûreté, ce qui est important, très, très important, c'est l'état d'instruction de dossier.
So without going into more detail, but what really is most important in political affairs and in the security affairs is Vous pouvez le répéter, c'était l'état des instructions.
Voilà. C'est-à-dire l'étape d'instruction de dossier. Voilà. C'est-à-dire au début de relance de dossier. Et là, par contre, les autorités iraniennes ne permettent pas que les avocats indépendants assistent les accusés.
But the Iranian authorities do not allow lawyers, independent lawyers, to assist the accused.
Après plusieurs changements ou modifications des lois, finalement, la législation iranienne a accepté que l'avocat peut être présent à l'étape de l'instruction de dossier, mais dans les affaires de sûreté, uniquement l'accusé peut choisir l'avocat dans une liste approuvée par le président du pouvoir judiciaire.
So after several changes of law, the law adopted provides that the person accused can choose their lawyer, but only from a list of pre-approved lawyers.
Autrement dit, pour le pouvoir judiciaire, les grands partis, sauf une vingtaine ou bien une quarantaine d'avocats, n'ont pas l'habilité d'assister au niveau d'instruction les accusés pour des raisons de sécurité nationale et tout ça. Ça, c'est-à-dire c'est une méthode pour éliminer les avocats à ce niveau.
So that means that a big part of lawyers who want to assist those accused in the investigations are actually unable to do so for reasons of national security.
Bon, c'est-à-dire, pour être précis, il faudrait dire que ce qui est important, ce n'est pas uniquement des lois. On pourrait adopter des lois, mais ne pas les appliquer.
But just to be precise, it's not only about the laws. We could always adopt the laws, but it's also about the application of laws.
En 2004, c'est-à-dire en 2002, le Conseil des ministres avait préparé un projet de loi concernant le droit des citoyens, dont une partie concernait les droits procéduraux, qui étaient conformes aux principes de droit international.
So in 2004, ministers prepared a draft of the citizens' law, which also included a part on procedural rights, which were in conformity with international law.
À l'époque, le président du pouvoir judiciaire qui arrivait au pouvoir, sous la pression de la société, il a pris une partie de cet texte et l'a adopté comme un règlement du pouvoir judiciaire.
So the president of the judiciary, after facing pressures from the society, took part of that draft and made it into a judicial order.
Et comme le règlement n'était pas assez fort dans les hiérarchies des normes iraniennes, plus tard, ils ont adopté comme une loi.
So because this order was not strong enough in the sense of the hierarchy of Iranian norms, the legal system, they implemented a law after that.
Cette loi pourrait assurer d'une manière au moins partielle les droits procéduraux et surtout le droit des accusés d'avoir un avocat indépendant. Mais cette loi n'a jamais été appliquée correctement.
So with this law, they partially provided procedural rights, also rights to the accused to select their independent lawyer. But this law was never correctly implemented or actually exercised in practice.
Nous avons été témoins des atrocités contre les avocats. Par exemple, je me rappelle un avocat qui s'appelait Ismail Zadeh, il a été tellement brutalisé par le système que son intégrité physique et même morale a été touchée.
So we were witnesses of attacks on lawyers. There's an example of an individual who was so brutalized by this that his integrity, both physical and mental, were actually affected negatively.
Par exemple, autre cas, c'est Abdel Fattah Sultani a été condamné à 18 ans de prison. Et il était emprisonné dans des conditions très, très, très difficiles.
Another example is Abdul Saltani, who was sentenced to 18 years of prison and had to spend prison in very serious and difficult conditions.
Moi, j'ai une liste qui n'est pas complète de 162 avocats qui ont été soumis à des sanctions, ont subi des répressions des appareils de sécurité iraniens.
I have a list, which is not a complete list, but it has around 560 lawyers who were suppressed by the Iranian authorities.
À titre de conclusion, je voudrais préciser que dans un système où il y a une corruption structurelle et systémique, le changement des lois ne pourrait pas aboutir à des résultats désirés.
So just to conclude, where there's a structural and systemic corruption, change of laws cannot lead to the desired results.
Le système est plutôt, ça ressemble plutôt à des bandes de mafia qui gouvernent le pays, c'est-à-dire il ne faut pas l'analyser en tant qu'un État normal. Ça, ce n'est pas possible, c'est-à-dire on n'arrive pas à des bons résultats dans ce cas. Il faudrait comprendre que c'est un système particulier dirigé par des bandes organisées également à l'intérieur du pouvoir judiciaire, c'est-à-dire ce qui se passe à l'intérieur du pouvoir judiciaire. Il est possible que le président le président du pouvoir judiciaire n'est pas au courant. C'est-à-dire, ça, ce n'est pas l'état de droit, c'est les groupes c'est-à-dire qui ont des intérêts. Pour les intérêts, ils sont en conflit et chacun pourrait se comporter d'une manière ou de l'autre. Ici, c'est les avocats, les victimes qui sont encore victimes des atrocités de ce genre de comportement.
So this system is more, can be more seen as like a mafia system. This is not like a normal country. This is a very particular state where even inside the judiciary, there are different groups that have competing interests. And it's even possible that the president of the judiciary is not aware of this. But these are the actions that affect negatively lawyers.
Le président du pouvoir judiciaire, le procureur général ou même le président de la République part en tant qu'un membre de l'opposition, c'est-à-dire personne n'accepte la responsabilité de ce qui se passe.
So the president of the judiciary, the state's attorney, the president of the republic, no one wants to take responsibility for what's happening.
Voilà, c'est-à-dire, pour être bref, il faudrait un changement radical. Ce n'est pas uniquement le changement des lois ou bien des comportements, mais il faudrait mettre fin c'est-à-dire un changement radical d'un système autoritaire, idéologique, qui ne respecte pas les principes de droit de l'homme et qui n'a pas la capacité de changement, c'est-à-dire ce système n'a plus de capacité de changement et de se réformer.
So what is really needed is a radical change, not only in the law, but also in the behavior. We need to stop this authoritarian system, which does not respect human rights and which itself currently cannot change.
Je vous remercie et je vous remercie également pour l'interprétation.
Thank you so much. Merci.
Thank you, Dr. Arjomand, and thank you, Nina, for translating. And Professor Rehman, if we can get you back up on the screen. So we're going to open up to doing some Q&A here. And I have a couple of questions that I'd like to lead off the discussion with. So with that, so I'm just going to get started. And as folks feel like they'd like to ask something, please feel free to type something into the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll get going. So first thing I want to talk I'll ask Professor Rehman this. So first thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that, you know, we've talked about a lot about lawyers in Iran, and we've talked about a lot about people in Iran. But we can also feel the effects outside Iran. And before this webinar started, we were talking about a speaker who was a lawyer that had come from Iran who decided to not be one of our speakers suddenly. And I think it's important that we recognize that because there are folks out there who don't want to be seen on screen, even anonymously. And it's important to know why for our viewers. So would you be able to discuss that a little bit?
Yes, I think it's a very worrying situation that Iranians fear reprisals. They fear reprisals not only when they are inside the country, but also when they are outside of the country. And these reprisals can take a range of forms. For example, there are threats, harassment, intimidation, targeting of family members, relatives, other acquaintances. But in more recent times, we have heard reports that individuals outside of Iran have also been targeted. So, for example, we've had cases of individuals who fled Iran and went to Iraqi Kurdistan or to Turkey or to the Middle East, and they have been abducted from these countries, these sovereign countries, back to Iran. So currently, we have someone who is facing the death penalty who was abducted from one of the Gulf states and taken to Iran. In the past, I've received reports that a number of Iranians have been deported back from countries like Turkey. So there is that fear of being returned forcibly, but also an added concern is that there are agents of the Iranian government, Iranian regime, who are operative in, for example, the United States. I mean, the US itself have had issues where Iranian agents attempted to put in danger one of the Iranian human rights defender. So there is a deep concern about the situation of individuals and Iranians' fear while they are outside of Iran, and it seems like as if there is no safe place. Iranian regime and its operatives are working everywhere. They have a reach everywhere, and therefore there is a real risk to what might happen to human rights defenders or those who speak out against the Iranian regime, and the consequences could be very serious for them or for their families.
Now, before I get into some of the other questions, I mean, let's personalize this a little bit more, if you don't mind. Are you at risk?
Look, my job, the work that I do, I am an independent expert. I have to speak on behalf of millions of Iranians who are suffering in the country. So I will never be intimidated by the Iranian regime. That is my role. I have to exert all my capabilities to promote, preserve, and protect the rights of the Iranians who are suffering. So I will not accept any threats. I have that commitment to myself. But as I say, the regime would not stop at intimidating or harassing anybody, including people who have official positions.
Thank you. So there, a very specific question we have here is, in what specific ways can lawyers or non-lawyers in other countries help? And I'm going to open this up to both of you. So Professor Rehman, if you want to go first, and then we'll let Nina translate the question and Dr. Arjomand can answer.
Yes, so the question is, in what ways can lawyers and non-lawyers help improve the situation? Is that, have I understood correctly?
Yes, how can they help?
Yeah, so I think the civil rights movement, the civil society movement has been a tremendous asset in terms of projecting and promoting the rights of the Iranian people. I mean, the Iranian diasporic community has led many movements. They have been the engine of promoting and highlighting key concerns. And I have been, I have over the past 6 years since I've held the mandate, I've been working very closely with the civil society, both inside and outside of Iran. The Iranian regime has tried its very best. The authorities have tried their very best to repress and to block the civil society. So, for example, they have censored and they have banned a number of organizations working within Iran. They have intimidated organizations working outside because they do not want human rights concerns to be known. And therefore, I think that the civil society has a key role to play. But if I can also mention to all of you who are listening to me and to the chair, to make sure that we promote and project human rights as a commitment. The human rights issue in Iran and elsewhere should be a sole commitment. Our commitment should not depend on the varying factors of where human rights violations are taking place, you see. And the centrality of human rights should be the focus. Other political considerations, I know that you will understand what I'm saying. Other political considerations are significant. But if we lose track of the centrality of human rights belong to all individuals, no matter what color, what religion, what race they belong to. Our concern must be with the human rights of the individuals, and we must not get bogged down to political interests. So everyone must campaign for a focused advocacy of human rights, and not because, okay, they belong to a certain nationality or a certain race or a certain geographical location, so we will not look at them, or a political stance for that matter. So I think the centrality of human rights, the work with civil society, engagement with your state partners. So every one of us must reach out to our state to say, look, we have to campaign and we have to advocate and promote human rights wherever the violations are taking place. So I think these are quite significant factors. And ultimately, international human rights law, which is a system run and managed by states, is affected or impacted and influenced by individuals. When they campaign strongly and sincerely on a certain issue, it does have an influence. So there are a range of actors, but I think we have to take responsibility individually and see what we can do to improve the human rights situation.
All right, Nina, we're gonna ask Dr. Arjomand the same question. What can lawyers and non-lawyers outside of Iran do to help?
Donc, une question pour vous, Monsieur Arjomand. C'est comment les avocats, ou peut-être aussi les autres individus qui sont dans les autres pays peuvent aider la situation en Iran. Ah, vous êtes en mute. Je pense qu'on ne peut pas vous entendre parce que le microphone n'est pas... Oui.
C'est bon?
C'est bon, merci.
Je pense que la solution est à l'intérieur du pays avant tout. Bon, c'est-à-dire ce que les gens à l'extérieur de l'Iran peuvent faire, que ce soit les avocats, les organisations non gouvernementales, c'est de soutenir les revendications du peuple iranien. Pour moi, c'est plutôt ça, et ce n'est pas une intervention, que ce soit militaire ou d'autres genres, ou bien des sanctions même économiques qui touchent le peuple. Moi, je ne suis pas d'accord. C'est-à-dire, si les avocats, les ONG veulent aider le peuple iranien, doivent soutenir les revendications des gens qui sont à l'intérieur de l'Iran et surtout et avant tout le respect des droits de l'homme. On pourrait dire que ce n'est pas grand-chose, mais c'est tout ce qu'on pourrait faire.
So, in my opinion, what can be done is mostly inside the country itself. But what people outside Iran can do is actually support the change in Iran. And this wouldn't be through, for example, an intervention. I don't envisage an economic or military intervention being useful. But if other lawyers or non-lawyers want to help, they should support Iranian people and especially support their fight for the respect for human rights.
Je pense que ce qui est important, ce n'est pas aller dans un sens de dire quelque chose et de faire autre chose.
What I think is important is to align what we're saying to what we're doing.
Souvent, on voit qu'il y a deux poids, deux mesures.
So a lot of times we see that there are different balances.
La société civile à l'étranger pourrait contribuer à la condamnation des atrocités qui sont actuellement en Iran. Ça, c'est important. La condamnation de ces actes sont très importants. Il faudrait avoir c'est-à-dire collaboration parmi les ONG pour condamner ces actions, mais pas pour intervenir ou bien encourager l'intervenir dans les affaires intérieures de l'Iran, puisque le régime profite des choses de ce genre et il profite pour encore réprimer les activistes à l'intérieur du pays.
So what could be done is to condemn atrocities that are now happening in Iran. There needs to be collaboration between different non-government organizations, but not in the form of intervention in internal affairs, because this system may take advantage of that or may take repercussions against Iranians.
Voilà.
So we have a question here that it's a little bit long. It says, I am representing an Iranian human rights lawyer pro bono in an asylum case. He fled to the U.S. through the southern border after being abducted, tortured, and forced to confess to serious violations because of his advocacy work. I would like to identify experts who can confirm that the events he describes are credible, but listening to the comments about Iranian agents, it says in the U.S., but I'm going to qualify that, Iranian agents worldwide, I'm concerned about how to do this while protecting him. Do you have suggestions?
Can I respond?
Sure.
Well, it's as I said that there is a risk, and we have encountered that risk. But that said, I think we also must have strong faith in our human rights mechanisms, in our judicial and legal systems, and we must work to promote and protect those individuals who are fleeing grave persecution. So I think it will be a huge injustice to an individual who has fled atrocities to actually not receive justice simply because there is a fear that further atrocities might take place. I think we have to have great faith in our systems, and we must make sure that this kind of harassment, these kind of threats do not or do not become prevalent on our consciousness, and therefore we must keep on promoting and protecting human rights in the relatively safe environment that we find ourselves. You see, I mean, if it was the case inside of Iran, I would have different view. But while we live in democracies and respect democracies, I think we should preserve those ideals and keep protecting all those who have fled tyrannies and violence.
I actually think this leads into a very good next question, and this is for either panelist, or both of you. Nina, I'll give you a second to translate this to Dr. Arjomand, and then we can decide who's going to answer. But the question is it your view that a legal system consisting of independent lawyers and judges is incompatible with theocracy?
Donc, pour Monsieur Arjomand, une question c'est, est-ce que vous pensez qu'un système juridique avec des avocats indépendants, avec des juges indépendants, est incompatible avec la théocratie?
Bon, moi, je pense que tout système idéologique, ça sera un régime autoritaire qui ne peut pas respecter l'état de droit d'abord. Pour moi, ce qui est important, la condition sine qua non de respect des droits de l'homme, c'est l'état de droit. Et l'état de droit n'est pas compatible avec un système idéologique. Ça, c'est clair.
So,
C'est-à-dire,
in my view, all the ideological systems, especially the authoritarian, are not compatible with the rule of law. And the rule of law is a condition to all independent systems.
L'indépendance réciproque de l'institution de l'État et de l'institution de religion, c'est indispensable dans le temps actuel en Iran.
Independence is inherently connected with the rule of law, and this is something we currently do not have in Iran.
Je vous rappelle que pendant longtemps, nous avons soutenu l'application intégrale de la Constitution.
For a long time now, we have supported a full and complete application, implementation of the Constitution.
On était conscient des problèmes qu'avait la Constitution. On savait que la Constitution actuelle n'est pas parfaite, mais on pensait qu'avec l'application intégrale de la Constitution, l'application surtout de son chapitre 3 concernant le droit du peuple, on pourrait améliorer le système dans longue durée.
So we were conscious that the Constitution has certain issues and it's not perfect, but we believe this could be saved with the full and complete application and implementation of the Constitution, especially its Chapter 3 on human rights. And we thought that this could improve the system long term.
Mais aujourd'hui, c'est évident que ce n'est plus possible, puisque l'interprétation du guide de la Révolution, de Velayat Farid, de relations entre l'État et la religion est d'une manière qui ne permet aucun changement démocratique, aucune transition démocratique dans le pays.
But today we know that this is no longer possible. We know that the interpretation of different guides and several documents, as well as the relationship between the religion and the state, does not allow for any democratic change.
C'est une instrumentalisation de la religion.
It's a case of instrumentalization of religion.
C'est-à-dire, on voit qu'il y a une seule personne qui décide et qui n'accepte aucune responsabilité.
So there's one person who decides on everything but does not accept responsibility for anything.
il se permet d'intervenir dans tous les détails, soit international, interne, scientifique, culturel, dans n'importe quel domaine. Et ça, ce n'est pas possible.
So this
C'est
person
ça au nom de la religion.
So in the name of religion, this person intervenes in all aspects of life, including international, cultural, scientific, and so on. And this is not... Sorry.
C'est pourquoi nous avons proposé un référendum, c'est-à-dire quand il y a 40 ans, la révolution iranienne a renversé le régime du Shah, c'était au nom de le droit à l'autodétermination. Le fondateur de la République islamique a dit que même s'il y a une constitution, la constitution a été approuvée par nos pères et nous sommes libres de le rejeter maintenant. Alors, c'est pareil pour le système qui existe actuellement, c'est-à-dire l'essence de notre revendication, c'est l'application de le droit à l'autodétermination qui était à la base de la révolution, même en Iran. Alors, personne ne peut le rejeter, personne ne peut le nier. C'est légal. Il faudrait permettre au peuple de procéder à un référendum, pas organisé par le régime, mais par des institutions indépendantes. Et dans ce cas-là, je pense que les avocats, les ONG internationales indépendantes pourraient être présents et pourraient être garants de ce référendum. Ça, par exemple, c'est là où les avocats dans d'autres pays ou bien les ONG peuvent jouer un rôle déterminant et positif et constructif.
So this is more about the reform that is necessary and the principle of autodetermination that was the basis of the revolution and the reform earlier on. There is some mentality that the Constitution is something that was based on our fathers, but that's something that we can reject, which is not true. It's this is our base. This is the ideal that should be respected. And one of the options would be, for example, a referendum, but not a referendum organized by the politics currently in place, but by independent institutions. And this is really where the role of lawyers, of independent lawyers, also from abroad, would be very positive and important.
Ni moi, ni Khamenei, nous n'avons pas le droit de déterminer ce que veut le peuple. Il faudrait donner la voix au peuple pour choisir. Alors là, la communauté internationale, dans ce sens, pourrait aider le peuple iranien.
So we need to give the voice to people in Iran, and this is really where the international community could help.
So I think we have time for one question, and I'm going to kind of combine two of the questions we had. So one is, what's the point of focusing on Iran for Day of the Endangered Lawyer? Will it help? And then the second question that's really coming through, which is the first question we got from in our chat or in our Q&A, is what keeps you hopeful for Iran in the future? So what is the point of DEL and can it help in Iran? But also more importantly, what keeps you hopeful?
Okay, so if I may respond to that. You see, Iran is a very, if I can call it, interesting nation state, because Iranian people are very articulate, they're very bright, they are educated, see, and that is the one thing which distinguishes Iran from many countries in South Asia, for example. I come from Pakistan myself. It distinguishes, there is a distinction between Iranian and Pakistani people, but there's also a distinction between Iranian and most of the people in the Middle East, because Iranian people are articulate, they know their rights, they claim their rights. So if you look at the Women Life Freedom movement, I mean, that was an amazing inspiration to millions of people, that women have rights, they are equal partners in a society. In many countries of the world, in many countries of the Muslim world, that would not have happened. You see, a woman's life is, its loss of a life is deplorable, but they would not have stood up for the fundamental principle that women have the right, women and girls have the right to make their own choices. They have a right to an inherent dignity. So I think that keeps it apart, that distinguishes Iranian people and Iran from many parts of the world. And I have said it many times that if Iran was given an opportunity to become democratic, if the Iranian people could have their aspiration realized, Iran would be the beacon of human rights in the Middle East, you see. So there is that hope. Certainly, I carry that hope that Iran, in a time sooner rather than later, would have internal form of a democratic process, and it would therefore inspire many nations of the Middle East to become democratic. But hope we have, and hopeful we shall remain. And let's see what happens in the coming months and years.
And Dr. Arjomand, what keeps you hopeful for Iran?
Donc, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez garder l'espoir pour l'Iran?
Bien sûr, j'ai plein d'espoir. Je pense que il ne faut pas se désespérer. Nous avons eu des moments très difficiles, mais il faudrait voir que la société iranienne est très vivante. Nous avons des spécialistes dans tous les domaines, des richesses importantes, de ressources humaines importantes, et nous avons des idées également. Malheureusement, nous avons un gouvernement qui n'hésite pas à commettre des crimes atroces, mais nous avons démontré que nous pouvons résister et nous ne perdons pas l'espoir. Et je suis sûr et certain que nous allons changer la situation. C'était l'histoire de tous les dictateurs. Et là, il n'y a pas de différence entre Khamenei, Staline ou bien Hitler. Il y aura un changement un jour et nous travaillons pour ça. Et ce qui est important, c'est de choisir des méthodes pacifiques. Ce qui est très, très important, nous pouvons garder l'espoir tant que nous employons des méthodes pacifiques. Une transition pacifique, ça c'est très important. Moi, je pense, tant qu'on respecte cette règle, on pourrait espérer à l'avenir et nous allons changer sans doute la situation.
Okay, so we shouldn't give up. The situation currently is really difficult, but you have to know that the Iranian side is very lively. We have specialists in all aspects, all domains. We have great human resources, and we have ideas. The government commits crimes, but we have shown in the past that we can resist, and I know that we will change the situation. And this was the case for almost all dictators. There's not much difference between them. And one day there will be change also for us. What is probably the most crucial part is really that we need to remain focused on the peaceful methods for doing so. And we can be hopeful as long as we have the peaceful methods in mind. Achieve that.
And is there the last thing here? We have 5 minutes left. Is there any final closing remarks that either of you would like to give and deliver for us? And thank you both for your time. This has been very instructional and educational, and has been an excellent program. So thank you for bearing with us through the technical problems. But yes, any final remarks?
My final remark would be that we must keep supporting the brave people of Iran, the human rights defenders, the activists, and especially the lawyers. And we have seen so many committed lawyers who have been working to uphold the rights of all those who are suffering. So I applaud them and I appreciate them. And I think as peoples of this world and as people who believe in human rights, I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to all of these lawyers working tirelessly to defend their own people. And I end by once again applauding and appreciating them. Thank you.
Et pour Monsieur Arjomand, est-ce que vous aussi avez quelque chose à ajouter avant de conclure la réunion?
Moi, je voudrais dire que la société iranienne a totalement changé. Ce n'est plus la société d'il y a 40 ans, quand il y avait eu la révolution. À l'époque, on cherchait la justice, mais sans la liberté, c'est-à-dire les droits de l'homme, la liberté individuelle et tout ça n'était pas vraiment important. Mais aujourd'hui, il y a un changement radical. Le mode de vie est changé. Les gens revendiquent la liberté avant tout. C'est-à-dire, je suis très optimiste. Je pense que avec cet esprit, nous pouvons changer le pays. Et ce qui est important est croire et essayer d'appliquer les principes des droits de l'homme dans l'avenir de l'Iran. Merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie. Je m'excuse pour ne pas pouvoir parler en anglais.
Currently we're in a society that is based on the different premises that was before the revolutions, before we were searching for justice, but without the basic human rights. And this has changed, society has changed. So I am actually very optimistic about this, and we should try to seek full respect and application of human rights. And thank you for inviting.
Well, thank you both. Thank you all again. Recall, Day of the Endangered Lawyer is January 24th each year, so tomorrow. I'm sure there are going to be more events worldwide in observance of the day. So please keep your eyes peeled. If there's anything else that you'd like to see, please feel free to reach out to the city bar. To answer any additional questions, we can arrange for that. But in the meantime, thank you again to our speakers, and thank you to our translator, Nina Turchik, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us this afternoon. It's been a great program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Merci
you.
beaucoup.
Thank you.